Hi everyone. I just see people are starting to turn up now. Just so you know, we're just preparing. We'll be going live in a couple of moments. Thanks for your patience. Hi everyone. We're going to be beginning the webinar now. So welcome to this webinar hosted by Webanywhere. This is part one of our two-part series about gamification in e-learning. Joining me today is Connor Gilligan. He's the head of the Professional Services Division at Webanywhere. He is currently sitting on the advisory board for the Iron Yard. That's a division of Apollo Education Group. He's also a board member for the Tin Can project with Learning Locker and has presented at many exhibitions, including Learning Technologies, Moodle Moot, and the Chartered Institute of Professional Development. He has over 10 years of experience in the e-learning sector, working with clients ranging from Texas Instruments to Twitter, Great Ormond Street Hospital in the UK, and Medtronic Inc. Connor will be presenting part one of the webinar on gamification. So it's over to you, Connor.
Thank you, Kieran, and welcome everybody to this webinar, part one in gamification. I'm really pleased that we've had such a good turnout for today's session, so thanks for that. As I said, this is part one of the gamification webinar. The second part I'm going to cover off around the date for the webinar, the second half, and also what we're going to be covering. So a bit about us really initially. Who are Webanywhere? So we're a UK business, but we also have offices out in Poland, outside Krakow, and also in Chicago, serving our US clients. We're a Moodle partner in the US, in the UK and Poland. We're also a Totara LMS partner for corporate learning. We've created our own knowledge sharing, knowledge acquisition platform called Promatum, which you can view at promatum.com. And we're a Learning Locker partner, which is our Experience API learning record store, which is open source as well. And as you can see, there are a few of our clients on the right-hand side. So moving on, we've done introductions. So what I'm going to do now is just go through a quick poll for this session, just asking a really basic question to the audience on today's webinar. Then we're going to move into what is gamification, what are the trends that we're seeing, gamification being everywhere. We've also done a survey of our customers, and we have a few the results that we want to share with everybody. We're going to look at some examples, and as I say, we're going to go through part two and then open up for some questions. So moving over to the quick poll. So the quick poll is, are you currently using gamification? Now, in the top left-hand side of your screen within the Google Hangout, you will see a little blue icon. You hopefully will be able to ask a question there. So if you can just, for the next minute or two, just respond if you're using gamification, yes or no. That'd be really useful. And then hopefully I can share the results with everybody. So I'll just wait a couple of minutes just for you to respond. Hopefully it's just a quick yes or no. Okay, so we've got a few results there. Not everybody, I don't think, has managed to add their answer, but it's looking like of the cohort of people, which is about 30 people on this webinar today, we have about 60% on 40%. Yes against no there. So 60% said yes and 40% said no. So that's really interesting that people are already using gamification as a delivery model. So what is gamification? So for me personally, there's probably two elements to gamification. I see this as the kind of leaderboard, badges side, but also then creating games as a package within a corporate learning environment. So gamification includes game design elements, game design principles, and fundamentally we're seeing that it's improving engagement in the corporate learning environment. So we did some research and we went back to Gartner and their hype cycle in 2011. And as you can see from this, gamification was mentioned there, circled in red, as a technology trigger. And actually what's interesting is it wasn't associated with anything to do with learning or education. It was actually associated with marketing and brand awareness, which I found particularly interesting. And there's a few examples that I'm going to share with you shortly. So we can see there it was the technology trigger that really started the gamification principle. And then we looked at some Google Trends, and what was actually even more interesting was then 2011, since Gartner's report, we saw this blue kind of curve and the peaks and troughs there, but on a really kind of rapid rise up to 2013, and it's continued. As you can see there was a kind of peak around 2014, which has dropped slightly, but it's looking promising for 2016. In this graph, you can see we compared against other hot topics in e-learning, such as mobile learning, in red, yellow, personalized learning, and in green, rapid e-learning, and then finally in purple, blended learning. So I was a bit surprised that mobile learning was maybe not as interesting for people in terms of what they were searching in Google. So I found that particularly interesting. So it's kind of backing up what Gartner was saying around this kind of hype cycle. So takeaway one for today's webinar is really that gamification is here and it's here to stay. So from the poll results, we've seen that people are using games already to deliver, but also we're seeing that the trends in the market, certainly from Google Trends and the Gartner hype cycle, are evidencing that it's happening and it's here to stay. So moving on, we're going to look at some of the gamification examples and what we can take away from marketing. So gamification is there, it's everywhere, and particularly around large businesses that are looking to create brand loyalty and awareness. So what bits of this can we take into our corporate e-learning? What are some of the best practices we can use as a delivery model for learning? So looking initially at Nike ID, I don't know if anyone's used it, but essentially we have Nike ID's website, and you can go onto that site, and through the e-commerce you can then actually customize your own training and buy that. So there's an element of personalization and fun in that, where you could create, as you see here, it could be delivered to your doorstep in a week, maybe slightly longer. I've not done it myself, but that is an interesting concept. And so what they're doing here is using gamification to create personalization for their customers. So how can we use that for our clients when maybe they're logging into, or our clients or our users when they're logging into an e-learning platform? The second example I wanted to share with everyone, another marketing example, is Starbucks. So you may or may not be aware that within the coffee shop Starbucks, you can actually achieve or receive these kind of points the more you visit or buy their coffee. And as a result, at the end of that, you then get free coffee. So for the Starbucks example, they've created this idea of loyalty within gamification. So again, how can we create some idea around loyalty and coming back, essentially, pull learning back into our e-learning systems that exist, and what can we learn from the Starbucks model? And then the third example is there's a lot of hype around fitness and wearables. We've seen that with the Fitbit, the startup in San Francisco, and what they're doing around kind of motivation and using badges and so on. But I've taken this example, which is the iWatch. And for anyone who owns an iWatch, you get your tap on your wrist and it asks you to stand up or go for a walk. And if you then do the exercise, you get a summary. You can either set that up for the day or for the week, and you get badges. And we've probably seen what Mozilla have done with particularly Doug Belshaw, who did a lot of the flagship work there around the Open Badges project, which is really interesting. But obviously this is something that is existing there within the kind of wearables fitness technology. And how, again, can we adopt that as part of our corporate learning delivery model? So they're just a couple of examples. And I maybe want to ask you this question, and something that maybe you could perhaps share with us on email afterwards, but where have you seen good examples of gamification? So be that examples in terms of when you're in the shop where there might be an example, or be that in your own corporate e-learning. So where are there some good examples, and what are good and bad examples of that? We'd love to hear from you if you want to share after the webinar with the contact details. I'd love to hear about your experiences. So takeaway 2 from the webinar, I think the takeaway, really summarizing that, is that we should embrace gamification. And why should we do that? Because people are already using it in their everyday lives. So we should look to continue that, and also take some of the best of breed examples from marketing and what we can learn. So we did this survey of our customers, and it's something that we wanted to share with you. So we asked a few questions, not many, but 3 interesting questions. The first one we asked was, when using e-learning, how often do you vote on content? What we found was the 40% of people said sometimes, 30% said often, and then 15% was never. So kind of 2/3 of the mix were saying that they have engaged or kind of used content for voting or liking within the e-learning platform. So that's something that we found quite interesting. So moving on to the next question that we asked, if you used games in your learning, would you be more productive? So this is more around the learner, the end user of e-learning. What was really promising was 35% of people that responded said yes, they would. 40% said they probably would. 15% weren't sure, and then the remaining 10 said that they were unlikely to or not at all. But we saw this mix of 75% there that were, 3/4 of the respondents that said if they had games in their learning experience, they probably would be more productive. So that was really refreshing to understand from our customers. And the third question, just a bit of fun really, do you play games? So we asked the cohort again, we said, are you playing games? So it doesn't have to be necessarily corporate e-learning, it could be Xbox at home, or even as much as maybe a Monopoly board. But 75% of people said they were, and 25% said no. So again, how can we bring some of these, best practices into play, but also let's promote games within our corporate e-learning to improve performance, but also have a bit of a change compared to the kind of click next on a PowerPoint within a learning management system or e-learning platform. How can we instill that in our organization? So this moves us on to takeaway 3. Your audience demands games as part of their learning. So we're saying here that our customers are saying that they are using e-learning. We're saying as well that the learner would prefer to have games within their learning. So let's continue to push that as a model, a delivery model with our audience. The next thing we looked at was other educational platforms. The first one we looked at was Karn Academy. People may or may not have heard of it. I certainly have, and a lot of people I speak to have. So they have delivered 850 million lessons, and learners have completed over 3.8 billion exercises since they started. So they're pretty outstanding statistics from a Karn Academy perspective. What I really liked about Karn and what they've done is they've got this really nice chart at the top right. If you log on to the site, you'll be able to see this, but essentially it's an overview of the learning modules that you've completed. And as you complete those modules, you then have these achievement badges, which are created through points. And with those points and badges, you're able to create avatar. Now, remembering that Karn Academy's audience is schools and education and K through 12, they like this idea of creating an avatar. But as you can see there through Elizabeth's avatar, she can actually contact people through the video there. So people who are a similar level to her, maybe perhaps completing the same or similar learning module, she can contact them. And through points and badges, she can add more to her avatar. So that's kind of, again, back to this motivation aspect. So is that something that you'd like to adopt in your corporate learning model? The next one is not necessarily associated with e-learning. It's sales dashboards. Now, these have existed for a long time, whether that was your typical kind of whiteboard in the office. But what's interesting is lots of CRM vendors that are linking into things like Salesforce.com are creating these leaderboards and actually creating them not just virtually, but also delivering them on a plasma screen in an office environment. So this particular team like basketball and sports, so what they've done is they've created this nice backdrop, but it gives you an overview of who's top and who's not maybe doing so well. So it's quite competitive really, which works in sales. Now, this doesn't necessarily work in corporate learning, but there are certain bits that might be something that you would consider incorporating in your delivery model. For example, engagement. So who are the most active learners? So that doesn't say who's passing or failing, which maybe you wouldn't want to display within your learning environment. This is more saying who's active, who's contributing in the business, who's learning. So that's an interesting model and certainly something that I wanted to share with you today. The final example, sorry, I nearly said the name of the company there, but Code Academy. There it goes. So yeah, you get the badges, we get points, similar to Karn and other massive online open courses that we've seen out there. But what I found most interesting was this concept of streaks. So a streak is trying to instill this continuous learning model. So essentially it's any learning modules that you've completed over a consecutive number of days. So it's this idea of going back and continuing your learning experience. So as you can see from Philip here, he's nearly there to his first streak in orange on his Python track, but he's not really been logging on for his JavaScript track. So how can you perhaps copy that as a model for your corporate learning, where what Karn Academy have done is they've got email automation that then pulls the learner back in to incentivize them to complete that next streak. And essentially it's this idea of continuous or always learning within the organization, or for the learners, better still. So I found that especially interesting. So takeaway 4 from today's webinar. So the fourth takeaway we have is learners are motivated by games in their workplace environments. So we did the survey, we found the results, it's clearly working. So, if it's going to motivate our workforce or our external extended enterprise audience or customers, then it's something that we should adopt and continue to improve on. But instead of maybe thinking of our own gamification strategy, let's look outside. Let's look at marketing, loyalty, brand awareness, customization and personalization, such as the Nike ID example. And how can we incorporate those into our e-learning experiences? So that was an introduction from myself. I hope you found it insightful. Part 2 of the webinar is going to go through a Gamification Masterclass. We're going to be joined by Jess Dempsey, who's a senior instructional designer at Webanywhere. She's based out of Minneapolis in the US. And also Stu Dyson, who is heading up our development content factory in both London and our kind of Polish office outside Krakow. And what we're going to cover in the session is, what do you need to build a game? So what we're talking about there is, what systems, what software do you need, and what are some of the options out there? We're going to also cover best practices in gamification. So that's more around storyboarding, kind of how you build that out and then also deliver a game either as a package or as some of the things we've seen there around badges or leaderboards. And then finally, we're going to cover what works and what doesn't work in gamification. So that's really around certain environments where games are maybe not appropriate and what to watch out for. Maybe some of the stumbling blocks you might come across that doesn't work in gamification, not just from the delivery side, but also the software side. So we're going to be doing that session on the 5th of May at 3:30 p.m. British Standard Time or 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. So that leads to the close of today's webinar. If there are any questions, then please feel free to ask them now. You should be able to ask a question within the screen there. So if you want to ask any questions, please do so now. Okay, so we had one question come through here. So the question was, in our experience at Webanywhere, when wouldn't you use games in your e-learning? So thinking about that and the answer to that question, when you wouldn't use games, I think there's certain scenarios that you wouldn't want to use a game. For example, certainly in the past we've worked with different finance companies, finance institutions, and say for example we might be, I don't know, delivering a anti-bribery course and building the package out. For me, that's probably not a good time to perhaps create a game for the delivery model. So certainly you've got to think about your environment, and you've also got to think about if it's really kind of fit for purpose and also going to achieve what you want, and also people are going to kind of take seriously. So that's probably not the best time to use a game. So thanks for that question, Kyle. So what are our thoughts at Webanywhere about games being used for required training? So I assume you're meaning kind of onboarding and compliance type training. For me, I think certainly, and I think that my colleagues at Webanywhere would agree that actually it's quite good. I think it comes down to certainly the kind of environment again, in a way. You know, is it that, you know, are the company's values around being fun and things like that? In which case, certainly on the onboarding process, it might be quite nice to have a game-like experience. Certainly in compliance, I think that, you know, if you take a typical, you know, back to what you're saying there, Kyle, around required training, certainly compliance, thinking around things like health and safety and so on. I think that we've seen maybe a model around scenario-based learning, but actually looking at a health and safety module, I think what I've certainly seen is your typical e-learning package that's being delivered is now bite-sized chunks, and rather than maybe going through, you know, a scenario-based exercise that lasts half an hour, why not snip that down to 5 minutes of a game where it's, you know, it's a kind of game environment in health and safety and the kind of do's and don'ts. So I think it does come down to the company and their kind of I guess approach to delivering blended learning and how they want that to work. But certainly I think there's certainly that appetite in the compliance area that, you know, if we take the modern learner, a millennial, they get distracted easily, and you know, they're quite into technology. So why not give them a game instead of maybe a PowerPoint online that takes a lot longer and isn't quite what they're looking for? So hopefully that answers your question, but feel free to drop me an email if you would like more information about that. I'm sure we could share some examples. So that brings us to a close for today's webinar. As I say, the next session you'll get an email about. It's on the 5th of May. And here are my contact details. If you do want to reach out, you can drop me an email at connor.gilligan@webanywhere.com, or give us a call. Alternatively, if you want to speak to a consultant about your requirements, you can go to our website, webanywhere.com, and fill out a form, and we'll get back to you quickly. So thank you very much for your time today. I hope you enjoyed it and look forward to seeing you in the next session.